Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives. And they're now using the power of their voice or podium to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Seth Mattison.
Patrick, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
The last time I saw you, we were in West Hollywood having dinner at Merwa, a restaurant in the Pindri Hotel, and you were packing up to move to Austin
That's
from Los
right.
Angeles. How's that been?
That's right. That was such a beautiful dinner and a beautiful way to sort of have a send off because it was closing a decade long chapter in Los Angeles. My wife and I are both from Minnesota. My wife had actually been in California for almost 20 years, and I was there from 2010 to basically, this past summer. And we did leave shortly thereafter. We are now in Austin, Texas. I got my cowboy boots, settling right in, brother. It's suiting me well.
So wait, I have to ask you, are you a Longhorn fan now, or are you an Aggie fan?
Oh, that's an easy. They're terrible, but we still got to go horns up.
Horns up, horns up. If I hadn't have gone to Vanderbilt, I would have gone to Texas. So Texas has a very special place in my heart.
You bleed that burnt orange,
And
which
burnt
is
orange.
man. I don't know the team this year. They're a heartbreaker, but all is well. It'll turn around, and it's a great city. We ended up finding a beautiful little place. We're a little bit farther out of downtown. We're about 45 minutes out towards the lake and on the water, and
Mhm.
we're getting settled in.
Well, I will be in Austin soon, so we will have to find time to connect. Um, I'm so happy to talk to you because you really are a thought leader in the world around this idea of leadership and executive development and workforce development. So I'm happy to talk to you given the times that we're living in right now. And we're actually in a moment that has been currently described as the Great Resignation. Um, I want to know from you what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Why are people leaving their jobs by the millions? I mean, what does this say about how work is viewed, how work is made, what kind of work environments we've created over the past 2 or 3 generations? What are you seeing and hearing out there?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So we've all heard that term, the Great Resignation, but I actually think it's mislabeled. I wouldn't call it the Great Resignation. I would call it the Great Reconciliation. And what I mean by that is that there's a leveling of the scales. So many people have felt like they have been sacrificed at the front lines of profit and expansion, and especially during COVID. And it was not an even exchange of value. And people are finally, really for the first time, rising up and pushing back. There's always been some tension that's existed between labor and leadership, companies and consumers in the marketplace. There's always been that battle, but we're watching a new iteration of it. We're watching people take back their power in interesting ways. We saw 4.3 million people quit their jobs in August when we saw the labor reports come out, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!" But there was this sort of idea that still had to do with government support and assistance and sort of a fluke phenomenon. Now, just to put 4.3 in perspective, that was 250,000 more people than had quit in July. So we were seeing this continued uptick. But then September numbers just came out, and September numbers are 4.4 million people. So again, the next month, even more people have left. And while the percentage of those people that are leaving are are definitely more represented in the service industries, more blue collar industries than sort of our highly educated white professional career spaces. There is still this shift in values and perception about what we're willing to sacrifice in pursuit of success. And it's not just a service industry phenomena, but certainly it is taking place there. And what's interesting is service industry salaries and income and pay has increased almost over 18% since pre-COVID. And so it's not about money. It's not just about money. There's a larger zeitgeist shift that's taking place. And I think many times it gets downplayed or misinterpreted as, people just don't want to work. And if we didn't have all this government support, they would still stay here. And it totally and completely misses what's happening. There's one little more nuance I'll add, and then I want to get your take on it, is that there's also this sort of collision of a couple of different forces that empower people. Obviously, mobile digital technologies are giving people power, but with this explosion of the metaverse and NFTs and Airbnbs and Uber, the list goes on of ways for people to support themselves that never existed before. I can't tell you how many Uber drivers I've talked to who are like, they made a little money on Bitcoin, they traded a couple of NFTs, they drive a few days on Uber, and it's like that's a part of the economy that never existed before, that now give them the ability to support themselves and their families, and they don't need to go take the job at the hotel, working at the front desk or in the restaurant. And people didn't see that coming.
I have to agree with you. I have two responses and two thoughts really about what you just said. In the shutdown of the pandemic, and then people sort of being reluctant to come back to work. And I work in the service industry, in the hotel industry, spa industry, so I see it up close and personal. There was a prevailing thought that, well, once the government support from the federal government and the state governments goes away, people will come back. And I kept saying, they're not going to come back. Those people are gone, because the people who want to come back have come back.
Yeah.
And so I think that thought highlights a way of thinking in business that is erroneous given to the times that we live in, which is people are motivated by money. And to a certain degree, people are motivated by money. We do need to have money to live. But
they want to be fairly compensated. They want to be fairly and justly compensated, certainly. But it doesn't stop there.
It doesn't stop there. And it's about a vision and a mission that's larger than the idea of we just want to drive profits for some unknown person or entity that writes our checks. And so I think that's a very interesting shift that business is having to make, is that we have to make a really profound and interesting proposal to an employee at all levels. And we see people, to your point, we see people not just at the line level or the blue collar level, but people in all capacities. On my LinkedIn, daily, I get 50 up notices of people who change their jobs.
Yes.
Change their careers. Absolutely. And so that's a really interesting point. The other thing that I think about is I have a dear friend. She has two fabulous daughters, who one just graduated from Vassar 2 or 3 years ago, and one just graduated from Wesleyan in Connecticut a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. They both are making work in a completely different way that is almost antithetical to how they were educated, where you're sort of taught to take these skills that you've learned and go work in this particular type of environment, corporate America, work experience, et cetera.
Sure.
One is giving private music lessons to people. The other is doing an internship and working in a vegan cafe. And they're happy. And when we talk to them from our Gen X point of view of, well, it's time to get a job, it's time to do this, it's like we're speaking French to them.
100%.
So I think that we haven't really, I think we're still determining what this world, this new thing is. And I ask you, is it a post-COVID reckoning, or is it a broader shift that's happening within the world that we live in the zeitgeist, as you said earlier?
It's a great question. Just to add on the example of your friend's, two children, part of that moment that they're navigating is, at 23, 24, they're also looking out, and we see the realities of both longevity, and our ability to work longer. You're saying you're not probably retiring at 65 with one career. You're probably going to have 5 or 6 different potentially totally different career opportunities, let alone jobs and opportunities. And you could be working well into your 70s. So you're talking about a 50-year run. And there is an element of privilege that comes with the ability to not have to immediately enter into the workforce to pay for food and a roof over your head that's been afforded to individuals whose parents can help support some of that on ramp. But if you're fortunate enough to do that, or you've been able to somehow put yourself in that position, I think there is a moment to be like, I'm going to go on a sabbatical. I'm going to try a couple of things. I don't feel this immediate rush that I have to have it all figured out, because this is going to be a 50-year journey. Now, with that being said, to your question of, is this did COVID create this? Is it a shifting landscape of values? Oracle came out with some interesting research just last week, and they found that 93% of respondents said that during the past 20 months, they had spent time in self-reflection, which is not overly surprising, but I love that we have an actual hard data point, because I've talked about that for a long time under this theme of what matters now. This has been a collective existential experience. We've all taken stock. 93% said they self-reflected. 88% of people said they had changed their definition of success. That to me was quite powerful of, we've been sold this vision of what it means to be successful. Go to a great school, get a great education, get into your career, and you are working your way up this hierarchical corporate ladder to get to this vaulted position. And people are saying, I don't know if that's what I want anymore. And you're right, it's not just our frontline workers. I'm fortunate enough to be doing some really interesting work with NASA right now, helping them develop their leader of the future profile and return to the office. And I'm coaching one of the CFOs at one of their 10 centers. And I'll give you an example of this profile, because I think in some ways it reminds me of you, Patrick, and profiles of people that we know. This gentleman's his name's Amir. He's in his late 40s. Brilliant, wicked smart, had a one-track mind, went to a great school, and in his mind he said, I'm going to go work at the greatest agency, the greatest institution on the planet, and one day I will be the program. I'm going to lead this place. And he is fast-tracked. He's the youngest CFO throughout the agency. COVID hits, he was based in the Bay Area, and he moves from the Bay Area to be near his wife's family in Arkansas. And when they moved, of course, they were able to afford 3 times the house that they could afford in the Bay Area. And as I'm talking to him on one of our calls, he's talking to me as he's watching the sun come up over the lake, over their lake house. And he's watching his young children, 6, 8, and 12, play and do homework and prepare for the day. And he said, what I realized is I was seeing this whole world that existed without me for so many years. They had their own language, their own routines, all these things that they did that I was not a part of. And now that I've had a chance to step into this world, this reality, I'm unwilling to give it up. And so I'm making different choices about what I'm going to do in my career. And he knows that some of those choices, while NASA will probably support remote work at scale into perpetuity, it will have implications on his career trajectory. Will he be tapped for the highest level jobs if he's unwilling to travel? And for the first time in his almost 50 years, he's willing to say, I'm okay with that because I have a new definition of success. And I don't think people see that coming.
And I think that is the X factor in all of this, is that our business sense has not caught up to our emotional sense. And I think one thing that's happened is that as we've all sat home for a year and a half, 18 months, however long we've been sitting at home, we've had to dig deep into what mattered to us. Because after days and days and hours, there's only so much of Zoom meetings you could do, Zoom birthday parties. And at certain moments, again, and it's a privilege to be able to do this because you're not fighting for survival, hopefully.
That's right. That's right.
You start to figure out what matters to you. And I think business has to catch up to this, and I think it's trying to. I think it's doing the best it knows how to. But there is a tension in the business world right now between the need for profit, the need for productivity and performance, and the real needs to manage what people need for their sanity and their humanity. And I think more and more people are not willing to sacrifice those things. And so if it means, well, I don't become the CEO of NASA or the chief operator of NASA, but I become the senior vice president of X, Y, and Z, I'm good with that. And I'll live in
Right.
a beautiful home in Arkansas.
And that may be fine, but there are business implications because that leadership pipeline and the expectation that like we can dangle these carrots, these traditional carrots in front of people, and they will put in 80 to 100 hours a week in pursuit of that. And it's not just at NASA, right? All four of the big accounting firms, the professional services space, the law firms, and the path to partnership, because up and coming associates are looking at the partners of the firm and they're like, you're divorced and depressed and miserable and an alcoholic. And why would I want that life? Like, yes, you have a vacation home in Hawaii, like, good for you. That's not what I want. Now, the challenge I think we're going to run into, and this is where I feel a little bit of a sense of responsibility to bring some real provocation to the marketplace, is that more and more businesses love to say that they're putting humans first, right? This human centric future that gets talked about, and it sounds really good, but at the end of the day, the KPIs and the metrics of success and the expectations, especially of Wall Street and investors, it comes down to one thing: were you profitable, and did you make a greater return on my investment this year than you did last year? And we gloss over the human casualties and the quality of life along the way. And so until an executive, individual, or team is brave enough to either bring a new message to the street, because this is also going to be about money and investors, a new compelling message that says, you know what? We might not be the most high growth, most profitable organization, but we will bring a solid return. But what we promise you is that the quality of life and the metrics we have in place, that people's health and well-being is cared for, that we make a positive impact on our communities beyond just writing checks and then fighting against policy through our lobbying arms and in DC, that we care about relationships with children and couples, and we measure those KPIs so that you know when you invest with us, maybe you don't get a 20% return, you get an 8% return, but you know our human beings are well cared for.
And to your point, it's going to be all the hidden numbers that start to matter, right? It's going to be, well, maybe we're not growing at a rate of 8% a year, maybe we're growing at a rate of 4%, but our turnover rate, our attrition rate is so low that we're seeing more productivity in our workers because they stay with us longer.
That's
And
right.
I think the companies that figure this out are going to be the companies who win, because that is the future. And
I
I don't.
totally agree. I would just add this. I would say, as a challenge to all of our listeners, is like, if you have an opportunity to influence this in your organization, is like, what's one non-traditional KPI that you might advocate for the organization starts broadcasting, pointing to, and talking about, that is a new measurement of success in addition to our traditional KPIs?
Correct. You have a really unique vision of this. You've spent a lot of time in this space with companies. I'm curious if the work you're doing today was always the dream, and if not, when did you know that this was going to be the work taking front and center in this part of your life?
It's such a great question. I think I have always been driven by two pursuits: entrepreneurship and teaching. And so what that looked like was, in college and university, I was trying to start businesses, had little side hustles. And I also, I played collegiate football. I was in sports, and so I loved coaching. I loved teaching youth. And like, I could have just as easily probably been a sixth grade teacher and a football coach. But the entrepreneurial side of me was also sort of trying to find opportunities and ways to make money, partially because I grew up very, very poor. While we had a farm, farming in the 80s, for those of you who don't come from an agricultural background, was absolutely horrendous. I mean, we lived on a knife's edge of losing the farm, being on welfare. I lived in a trailer house in Minnesota. There was a snowdrift that came in under the front door. Like, everybody has their stories, but that was mine. And so I was I was really motivated by financial security. So I've got this entrepreneurship bug, this teaching bug, and I went into management consulting out of university, was studying change management. And I found that one of the pain points our clients were experiencing, this is in the mid 2000s, was the entrance of the millennial workforce. We were brand new at that time, leading edge members. People didn't really even know what that term was yet. We've seen it, that term relentlessly for the last decade now, but at the time it was new. And so I started doing field research on that idea, youth coming in, next generation. I started studying it, looking at external experts, and I saw that there were a couple of individuals who were like my age, in their early 20s, that were publishing books, writing, and speaking on the topic. And I was like, wow, for the first time, my age, from a teaching business perspective, instead of it being a hindrance, you're too young to know what's really going on, could actually be a benefit. And so the entrepreneurial teaching angle came together of like, wow, you can write, research, and speak and train on these topics. And so I sort of threw myself into it, and I got very, very lucky along the way. I found 2 best-selling authors that I was able to essentially apprentice underneath for a few years, help them write a book about the millennial generation. And when they retired and sold the business, it gave me an opportunity to pivot away from just studying and researching generational dynamics exclusively and looking at larger future of work trends. Because I always believed that studying youth, really at the end of the day, what it was doing was giving us clues about where we go next. Right? It's the trends of where the world shifts to. And so we rebranded under, helping leaders prepare for the future of work. And it's been now almost a decade of doing this work. And I think it is like some of us were like, how did you fall into this sort of unique, obscure place? But it's a culmination of a couple of different doors that open, but also listening to your own internal compass of like, what's the value underneath of it? It's teaching, it's sharing, it's the idea of being able to build companies and support companies as they move through transformation.
You said 2 things that are very interesting that I want to kind of dive into with you. One was that you grew up poor in a farming community, and that you played football in college, which is, we spoke earlier about Texas, University of Texas, and my nephew played football there, and he's now gone on to play in the NFL. I want to talk to you about poverty, because I think it's a 4-letter word in America, and I never really understood poverty until I left the country and lived in the Caribbean and lived in Asia.
Sure.
Can you talk about what living, and you described it as living on a knife's edge. Can you describe what that means in real terms? Because I don't know if we don't talk about hungry people. We create all these euphemisms, food
Sure.
insecure, things like that. What was it like in real time to experience that growing up?
It's a really interesting question, and I tread into those waters lightly because it's all relative. My level of insecurity, where that measures against someone else's. I'll say this: while we lived on the knife's edge of like losing the farm, there's absolute truth to that. Was I ever hungry? Was there ever not food on the dinner table? No. And one thing that does come from the power of, and it's when I say owning land, and there's such an important conversation there from a cultural standpoint too. There were loans on the land. We didn't own the land outright. And so if we weren't making those payments, that land could have been taken back. We were renters almost, so to speak, on that land. But when you are on the land in the country and you sort of have this ability to fend for yourself, that even the idea of food insecurity, you sort of knew like we could always live off the land. What I can tell you is that even as a kid, one of the things that my mother used to say to me all the time that it was so ingrained, I actually thought it was a single statement, was this phrase, can't afford it. Because you think about it as a little kid, you're always asking, hey, can I get this? Can I get that? It's a candy, it's a little toy. And like my whole youth was just, can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. And you just sort of grilled into your mind, wanting a pair of Jordans, playing basketball and having to get the knockoff version of the Jordans, the plastic version. Like wearing cutoff sweatpants and taking a magic marker and drawing a Nike swoosh on the sweatpants because I just wanted to feel like I had some Nike gear. Like I can distinctly remember those elements. But when you're in it and your community is also sort of reflective of that, you don't feel the gap between yourself and other people so much because many people were sort of in that same place with us.
Yeah, I mean that's a powerful image, that drawing the Nike swoosh on a pair of, I mean that's it's a very powerful image. And I think it's all those things impact your life and impact your worldview and how your level of empathy must be incredibly high.
I definitely feel for people that go through that, but there was also a racial and a cultural element to it too, because when the Nike sign on the sweatpants was a pair of Michigan shorts that I was drawing because I was obsessed and loved the Fab Five. They were my sort of first sort of insight into African American culture and sports. And I grew up in a primarily, white community, rural southern Minnesota. And so it was a view into that world. And then when I went to play college sports, I had many teammates who came from very, very diverse backgrounds. But there's an interesting part of that story that I don't always share in watching sort of different cultures navigate and reconcile race themselves. So I had two collegiate teammates. One was from St. Louis, and he came from a very economically depressed community in St. Louis, marginalized community, and had been shot during his youth, had bullet wounds. And I had another friend whose mother was Puerto Rican, his father was black, but he grew up in a pretty affluent part of the Midwest. And watching them navigate their own cultures, the one friend, his name is Julio, his mother was Puerto Rican, father was black. To him, the rest of our black teammates, Julio wasn't black enough. And for Bummy from St. Louis, as he's navigating a primarily white school, he wasn't white enough. And watching them sort of switch task between these personas of Julio needing to feel like he's not black enough and Bummy's not white enough, and how they were perceived by the world, and me watching that play out in real time, shifting identities depending upon where they were. And I had no idea the toll that took on both of them until I was able to actually sit and watch that play out in real time, because I had never had that experience before. That I can't just show up fully as me, that I have to be mindful of who I'm with and how I might need to change my language, was so powerful for me to experience at that age.
When I was growing up, I was always accused of never being black enough. And it stayed with me through elementary school. People didn't want to beat me up.
Yeah.
Junior high school,
Yeah.
college in particular, because in college in the 80s, they were bringing, and they're still doing it now, but you're filling a number. You're filling a, for people like you're black, you'll go in and you'll fit and you'll be best friends with all the black people on campus because you're black and you'll be a part of all the same organizations. And I got to Vanderbilt in particular, and there was a rub, and I was viewed as not being black enough. My approach, which is probably indicative of lots of things just about how I was raised, was I didn't really care. And I was going to do things the way that I wanted to do things and pursue the things that interested me. I'd never felt comfortable in my blackness until I lived overseas. They were not judging my blackness based upon the language I chose to use. I never heard, well, you talk too white when I lived overseas, and you shouldn't be doing this because you're black, which are the messages that we sometimes get in the black community today around what our blackness means and how do we interact and relate to the black community. But it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think it's a great gift for you that you got to see that up close and personal.
It was such an eye-opener to me of the mental gymnastics that were required from both of them to be able to navigate this. And it stuck with me throughout all of this. And, while I'll only ever have the perspective as a white, straight, cisgender man, I try to drop into that whenever I can to have some perspective as what other people are going through.
How, in your profession right now, there is, and in all professions, there is a real concerted effort to have a diverse group of voices that are coming in from a gender perspective, from a race perspective, from an ethnicity perspective.
Yep.
How are you navigating that in your career as a cisgendered white male when so much of the industry, of all industries, is really like looking for other people? How are you navigating that? And how are you still in so much demand? How are you doing that?
It's such a great question, and it is obviously something that I am aware of. But like many things in life, it's really is focusing on the controllables. I do think it's a phenomenal thing, and in some ways it is a reckoning where for many women and for minority experts, you had to be so exceptional just to beat out a mediocre white man. I mean, that's just the truth. You have to be exceptional and fight so hard for the slot of just an okay middle-aged white man. And this is not a woe is me. I'm incredibly blessed and lucky. But what it really boils down to is just controlling what I can control. So if you know what, there's going to be 4 speakers presenting at this conference or 4 on a panel, and there's only going to be one white man, then you have to be the very best at what you do. And so that's what is required of me now, of like just be in pursuit of the very best that you can be, realize your potential, do the work, go the extra mile, and it's going to take care of itself. And thus far, it's taking care of itself.
I have no doubt about that. I think the level of the work that you do is exceptional. And I've seen a lot of motivational thought leaders, executive coaches, executive leadership. And I think what you do is incredible, and how you're able, and now hearing your story, understanding how you connect to people and how you bring a realness to your work, I think is, it only reinforces the exceptional view that I have of you as a professional in terms of what you do. And so much of what you do, Seth, I don't know if you would describe it this way, but I'm going to describe it this way.
Hmm.
Um, so much of what you do is about inspiring people to live a better life, to think differently, to uplift those who work with them and for them. And I wonder what inspires you as a husband, as a man, as a friend.
It's a great question. Um, I pull inspiration from lots of people that have done difficult things. And difficult things, in my opinion, is not just the people that have climbed Mount Everest. It's the stories of Julio and Bummy and how they've had to right make their way through life, because it's those little moments when you bump up against the resistance and you are fearful of putting yourself out there and taking those next steps. I'm inspired by you right now and you launching this inflection point in your own career, in your own life, the decisions that you're making right now to take a stand and to write a new story and to write a new chapter for what's next for you. You could have absolutely continued down the course that you were and probably lived a very perfectly fine and happy life. But you decided to be brave and courageous and step out and claim something new for yourself. And so in this business of watching the cultural zeitgeist shift and researching what's happening in the world of work, you're just trying to pay attention to the little stories and the little examples that are all around you if you are paying attention and if you have a natural curiosity about how things work and what it feels like for people to have the experiences that they have. And that curiosity, I think, has served me well. And so I find inspiration in lots of interesting places, interesting small places. But I think mostly I find them in the power of relationships like even you and I have. That's where they come.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's why your grandmother always says your friends who you hang around with are so important, because that's even more so than I think even family, because at a certain point when you start picking your friends, that's a very intentional choice,
Oh,
you know.
it's huge. And a lot of times if you are in pursuit of growth and your own evolution, not all of those relationships will evolve with you. And depending upon where you're at in your life, you'll probably go through moments of time where you'll have to say goodbye to certain relationships, and it can be very painful. There were deep relationships that I had from playing collegiate sports that I had to evolve through my 20s and then into my 30s, and it was hard and painful because you think you're going to be together forever. But if you aren't careful, it doesn't mean that you don't always love them, that you don't wish them well, but being very mindful of that time that's being invested, because it is the old saying, you are the sum total of the five people you spend the most time with. What are they thinking about? What are they reading about? What are they watching? What are the conversations? Because you will find yourself in a similar place. And are those conversations and ideas helping you evolve into your next highest iteration?
I was amazed when you told me you played collegiate football because you were so lean, so mean. And I was like, how did you ever survive that?
Little 5'10" white dude playing, and I was a wide receiver too, so it's like the sort of the quintessential, just like speedy, super quick, never put a ball on the ground, and like kind of be hard nosed. But I think it sort of suited my personality. That's kind of how I feel. It's sort of a little bit of the underdog, a little bit scrappy, just enough sort of natural ability, but you've got to sort of leverage all of the ancillaries around you. And then like being in an environment of, the wide receivers are always all the pretty boys who are all just like perfectly geared out.
You wanted the gear.
100%. Yeah, perfect eye black, and just like all the right. It is what it is.
So I'm curious what a lot of this podcast we've asked during this podcast, we've asked people, what was that moment? What was the point in your life that took the biggest leap of faith? That was your yes.
Ooh, such a good question. So I'll briefly touch on them, but I think there's three chapters. The first chapter is when I went to apprentice for the researchers and best-selling authors in the generational space. The economic crash of September 2009 had just hit, and their speaking calendars in business had essentially emptied out, and they were basically like, we'd love to have you come on, but like we literally cannot afford to pay you. And so it was basically working for free. And to do that, like I was donating blood platelets and like working like legitimately twice a week, because it paid a total of like $250 for the month to go twice a week. But it was like that made my car payment. And so I paid some dues to be able to get in the game. That was one, that leap. Second leap was when I left them and entered into the marketplace completely on my own. It's like I had been able to be in the game based off of their work, their brand, their reputation. For the first time, I had to go out and stand alone on my own and hope that that was enough. And then the last one has happened during COVID. And so I've decided that, like the other 93% of people who self-reflected during COVID, I did as well. And I decided that I really wanted to be a part of a larger team. And that while I love this work of teaching, I wanted something that didn't put me on the road and that I could build with a group of people. And so we've built two new companies under the banner called Impact11, and it's speaker management and speaker development. And so we absorbed an existing business called Three Ring Circus that was launched in 2017 by a dear friend of mine, Josh Linkner, that is specifically about helping people who have a message that they want to bring to the world, an existing speaker who's trying to level up, a seasoned speaker who needs to reinvent, to help them through that journey into the marketplace. And we support them through one-on-one coaching and live event boot camps and creative services. And we've got a team of 10 now, and I'm having so much fun. But it's scary. It took an investment. It took a leap of faith. It took, committing to a partnership and a group of people. And I'm learning all sorts of new skills, and I'm out in the deep end swimming and trying to figure it out. And so, I'm scared and nervous and anxious all over again.
I love that. I love that you're teaching. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, "When you learn, you teach," and I think that is the virtuous cycle, right? That is the virtuous.
You're so right. And we've had so many. So I've got three other business partners, and for all of us, we've been so fortunate to have people who took shots on us, who put bet, placed a bet on us, invested in us, gave us time, gave us energy. We wouldn't be here without it. And so there is this huge gift of like passing that on to people. But the work is so rewarding because even like there's so many people who have really powerful stories to share, and they just need a little coaching on like some structure and some positioning, and just a little tweak in the language so that it differentiates them in the marketplace, and then you watch them just like launch. It's a totally new experience. I was at a conference this past weekend, not as a speaker, but as a business owner, observing and watching talent, and it's so fun to be in that place of like watching others and being like, I see the raw talent right there, and like my brain is lighting up of like, just let me get my hands on them and they will go to the next level. So
Mhm.
that's the new adventure that we're on now.
Seth, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. I am eternally grateful to you. Um,
I so appreciate the opportunity. I think in closing, I would leave everyone with two thoughts. As
yes.
we're looking out to the future of work and where we go next, the first thing I would say is number one, there is no one future of work. There are only futures of work. And what I mean by that is no single organization has the same exact blueprint. And so that means we have to move forward with a high degree of vision and agency and agility to know we get to create our future. We're not bystanders, we're not victims. You get to go create the future of work that you want, but you've got to claim it. And that requires grabbing and holding on to your agency, right? I am the captain of my ship. I get to create my reality, never relinquish and give that up. And the last one is this idea of learning agility. I think it's so tactical and important for everyone today. Learning agility, my favorite definition, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. We're,
Mm.
in, we're entering this period where all of this change happens so fast. You're being asked to learn new skills, do new things. And so it's being able to lean into the discomfort of that instead of pulling back with a fixed mindset of I can't figure this out. I'll never figure it out versus I'm a student and maybe I'm not perfect today, but I can figure this out, and I'm okay with that, and I lean in and I experiment and I keep getting better. So own your agency, lean into the agility, go shape your future.
Ooh, go shape your future, guys. Everyone, go shape your future. To those of you who are watching and listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Seth.